Hello and welcome to Adventures in Venueland, an EVMC podcast. Join us for this all-access pass backstage and behind the scenes with some of the brightest minds that cross the scope of the live event industry. I'm Dave Rettelberger.
And I'm Paul Hooper. We'll introduce you to incredible guests who journey with us as we dive deep into the world of venues, tours, festivals, and everything in between. Grab your laminate and meet us in Venueland.
Today's adventure takes us to Prince George, BC. We're checking in with a man who has been passionate about events and marketing throughout his 35-year-plus career. He's also an author of 3 books, and he's one of my favorite people. Please welcome the manager of entertainment from CN Center, Glen Mikkelsen. Glen, good to see you.
Hey, gentlemen. Great to see you folks.
Now, did you I know people listening just hear the audio, but did you put on the bow tie just for us, or is the bow tie everyday Glen wear?
Well, it comes and goes. You know, it's part of the operations around here to get people excited about different things. And sometimes the bow tie is the ticket. But for you folks, yeah, that was the thought for sure today.
Very kind of you. So for folks who are listening, who are not familiar with Prince George, you tell us a little bit about where you're at and the CN Center.
Prince George is a city of about 80,000 people in northern British Columbia. It likely is the largest venue in Canada north of Edmonton. So there's a few smaller ones north of us, but between us and the Arctic, we're about the largest venue. So it's remote. The closest venue of our size is a 6-hour drive away. So that's where our hockey team has its closest games, a city called Kamloops. But, for the major cities, like people are probably familiar with Vancouver, Edmonton, it's a 9 or 8 hour drive for us to get to those communities. So we are kind of the central community in northern British Columbia, and we host people from all over, huge geographical range to come to our events in our community.
Are you often seeing tours kind of dip up to your venue from Vancouver? Is that kind of like how they'll route up when they'll route sometimes, or is it kind of speckled throughout like a Canadian tour, or does it vary date to date?
The trick we have to do is we have to convince them to kind of route from southern Canada, British Columbia typically, so they can start in Vancouver, work their way through southern BC, and then entice them to hopefully come up and route through our community so they can stop here and then either head east over to Edmonton, so say Vancouver here, Edmonton, or there are the communities of Dawson Creek and Grand Prairie, which are further north of us, 4.5 to 6 hours away. And sometimes they'll hit our community and then loop up further north and then come back south into Edmonton or to those communities in Alberta. The rare occasion we have had, for example, Cirque du Soleil, when they came through in 2015, they routed here, and then their next gig was in Fairbanks, Alaska. So that was like a 24-hour drive from here to get up there. But that doesn't happen very often.
You talk about Southern Canada. That's such an unusual term for us here in the States because we never think of anything in Canada as South. So Southern Canada is interesting. So obviously being up a little farther north, weather probably plays a big role in your schedule, right?
Yeah, probably we deal with winter. That's a consistent season for us. So, not too far from us. I know they're having first frost last week. So we won't have that. We'll have that in maybe a week or two. It could be freezing already. But it can snow here, the end of October and then last till April. So we have a very, robust system within our community to remove snow off city streets because that's something we face consistently throughout the year.
Yeah, and you kind of got some neat stuff where you even host like a walking program for residents during the cooler months.
Oh, yeah. Well, funny you should ask, because so we've got the walking program, which starts end of October and goes till same thing, just early April. So that offers people a chance to, get some free exercise within our concourse. But we've had some inquiries over the last few weeks because we have all this forest fire smoke. So that's a new issue that we're starting to deal with in the last couple of years. Our people are concerned about having to exercise outdoors in the summertime because of our smoky conditions. And in fact, as I look outside my window today, we are blanketed in a haze of fire smoke. So that's a new inquiry we're starting to get. So we might be open year round for various reasons.
Interesting.
You've been there at the CN Center for a while, but for folks who've never had the chance to be, talk to me a little about the building and kind of its history in the community, and maybe a little bit about the kind of events that you host there as well.
It's your typical 6,000 seat arena. So you're kind of from our standpoint in Canada, it's kind of your mid-size rink. It was built in 1995, so coming up upon our 30-year anniversary here in a couple of years. And we host a junior hockey team. So the Prince George Cougars, that's our main tenant. And they try to develop young hockey players to get drafted into the NHL. So some of the players that we've had here are Dustin Bufflin, who won a Stanley Cup, Brett Connolly as well. And then Zdeno Chara, who, of course, a famous player with the Boston Bruins. He played his junior hockey here. So he was in the mid-90s, he played a year or two here. But then, we've been very fortunate to, I would say, punch above our weight in terms of attracting various entertainment here. So Elton John, Kiss, Carrie Underwood, Jerry Seinfeld. We've been very fortunate to have quite a range of, world-class entertainers who we've, enticed through, by hopefully being able to sell the tickets and our capability of getting the job done and making their day go well, and some northern hospitality here too, so that they feel welcome. And we've been able to host over quite a range of world-class entertainers.
Didn't you all have a big curling event there too within the last couple of years? And is that something that is common where you'll get kind of some different events like that, or is that a very unique thing where it kind of travels around Canada and it just so happened to land in Prince George?
Yeah, that's the curling events. Those are events that various communities will bid on each year. So they've got Curling Canada has the men's championship, national championship, which is their premier event, the Brier. They have the women's championship, the Scott Tournament of Hearts, which we've hosted here. But then they also switch between the World Men's and the World Women's Curling Championships. And curling, and probably in Canada, it's a bigger deal than anywhere else in the world. And we have a very kind of special relationship with that World Women's Curling Championship, which we were all set to host it here in 2020. And it was canceled the day before it was supposed to begin due to the COVID restrictions. So we had basically every team here except one. We had the whole building transformed, which was a major undertaking. And then, of course, with the rest of the world making those very significant decisions, we were part of those down in the basement of our building. And to our shock and surprise, that whole event was canceled. But we were fortunate enough that it came back a couple of years later, and we were able to host it in 2022.
Glenn, have you been able to get down on the ice and try curling?
Oh yeah, and we've got I know it's not in Canada, right? Most little communities of all shapes and sizes have a curling club, so it's kind of shrunk in popularity as time has gone on here in the last 20 years or so. But you can go through some very tiny towns in Canada, especially on the prairies, and you will find a curling club, and that's the hub for people gathering together in the winter.
That's amazing. I love it.
Oh yeah.
People need to check out the video that you all did too, that was kind of promoting that event when it was coming back, which I think hits on something that I guess I kind of want to ask you about. Is you are sort of, for people that know you and have met you at conferences, you're sort of known for, wearing these bold outfits, not being afraid to throw on a fun hat or something, something to kind of, I don't know if that's something you've always embraced throughout your life or career. Is it kind of a fun, like, thing where you see it as like a little self-deprecating and goofy, or is it something where you're just embracing? I love it about you. I think everyone does. You know, one of the, I think I'd met you before this, but I remember when I was at the Vancouver conference and you were sort of one of our hosts for that, you did the welcome speech and you had just the most wild and amazing outfit on, and everything was just so over the top Canadian in the best of ways. And I think it really left this mark in people. And so I do think people, you know, think of you as someone that's like willing to just think of all these creative ideas. Yeah, but in a good way, you know, and you know, it's like you're willing to just take these fun, goofy risks and think of, okay, why don't we try this? Whereas other people might be like, you know, they're too afraid to, you know, have a little fun with it, you know?
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's very kind of you to say that. Yeah, you know, I kind of developed that we are in the fun business. Like, we are very fortunate in the positions that we are to bring people together, hopefully for a memorable experience of whatever that can be. And, you know, I think if we can, you know, we have to convince people that it's going to be they're going to have a happy, fun time. So, you know, if I can do that and share that by at least, you know, maybe being slightly self-deprecating and just, you know, buying into the moment, then, you know, I'm happy to do that. So, yeah, I've been very fortunate to help share my enthusiasm for what's coming to our community, and, you know, you folks coming to Canada and Vancouver. Like, I was just so delighted that you were there, that, you know, to help make that even a better experience for you, then I'm happy to do that.
You know, you talked a little bit about being the only, you know, venue around for several hours. So what is you know, obviously you've got a 6,000 seat venue, you're not dealing with a multi-billion-dollar marketing budget. So how do you make the decisions? You've got a big Bryan Adams tour coming soon, right? How are you making those decisions about how far you go out with marketing? Because I'm sure, like you were saying, you see people drive from great distances to come to your venue.
Well, yeah, we particularly out west. So this is so we're kind of in the center of complete center of British Columbia. So the west of us, there's a number of communities. So all the way out to a town called Prince Rupert, which is 9 hours away. So people will travel from that far because we're the largest venue that will have shows that they can drive to. Either there, they have to drive here and then down to Vancouver. And in fact, we will have guests that live on these islands called Haida Gwaii, which is another 6-hour ferry ride from Prince Rupert. So they'll take that ferry ride, then they'll jump in their cars or trucks and drive all the way here. So how do we get people here? Yeah, it's, you know, significant distances, but, you know, it's just living in the north. You don't blink at those, right? So, you know, I'd work with different media partners out there. We have there's a First Nations radio station based out of Terrace, which is a 7-hour drive out west, and they have all these satellite repeater stations in these very small communities all across northern BC. So we work with them for, you know, shows that make sense within their market and their music, and we'll get, you know, help get the word out that way. The other thing, you know, within our region too, we have a significant Indigenous population. So we're working with the First Nations radio. We will, you know, their communities support various artists that we've come through Prince George. So George Thorogood's an act that we were working with them most recently until George got sick this past year and wasn't able to make a show. So, you know, we will partner with media outlets like that. And in fact, our local media stations too, they have sister stations within other communities around the north as well. And they help get the word out that way as well.
It's no small task. And obviously, you know, you've been, as Paul and I referenced, you know, to a lot of venue marketing conferences over the years, the EAMC and now EVMC. You come and you see some stuff that, you know, happens, but yet you've stayed in this community for a long time. What is it about Prince George you love so much?
Well, that's a good question, because, you know, it's the kind of town that when you first come into it, it's a little rough. So it's a northern city, and you know, that kind of way, like the architecture, you know, just our climate can be a little tough on outdoor spaces. You know, you know, it's a working class community. There are 3 pulp mills, so we have a higher concentration of pulp mills than anywhere in the world. Sawmills. So the log industry is taking a bit of a hit, but there's mining, there's pipelines. Anyway, so it's it's a transient community where people come in, work in the resource industry, and move on. So what's kept us here is that once we kind of figured out, okay, that behind that, there's this amazing access to outdoor experiences. And the other thing, as opposed to some of the other communities I've lived in over the years before we got here, is that because people come and go here quite frequently, that people will embrace you very quickly. So rather than some communities where, it takes time to break into social circles, here people say, okay, well, you want to volunteer or you want to participate? What can you offer? We're glad to have you. And that kind of, culture and that philosophy has also been embraced by our venue, in fact, by my coworkers and the various contractors that we work with. When people come and bring their tours here, we will go above and beyond to make their experience hopefully superlative, because it's just so hard to get here, right? It's people have to make a significant effort to come to Prince George, whether getting your trucks or your planes up here, if you're, the various artists that may have come in by flights, but it's not an easy place to get to. So once you're here, we're going to do everything we can to hopefully make your experience a little more extraordinary, because we're very glad you're here. And that kind of attitude, it's in our community, within our venue, but also our community. So it's been a really a surprising place for us to spend almost come up to 30 years here. It's the kind of place, but a lot of people have that experience. They say, we're going to come here, spend 2 or 3 years, then move on. That was our intention when we came here. And here we are almost 30 years later.
And you just fell in love with it because it's so welcoming and such a community, it feels like.
Yeah. And, you have great experiences too. So, I can tell you that recently we have had more bears in our community. There's nothing that brings neighborhoods together like bears. And this
that's the quote of the podcast. There's nothing that brings neighborhoods together like bears.
This year, they think it's because of a lack of berries, but we have had bears coming into the city in numbers never seen before, especially in August. So, for example, the other day, this was already happened, but the other day I walked our dog through this meadow, kind of a forested park area, which is a 10-minute walk from our home. So for sure I'm going to see a bear. Nope, didn't see a bear. So then I came back and I'm just in front of him in the carport, kind of looking at a newspaper. And then I look up, well, there's a bear in our backyard. Yes. And we've had probably 12 bear scats I've had to clean up in my yard already this year. And, you walk through the neighborhood, and I can tell you how many, you look around our front lawns and there's all these bear poops. So we've had an extraordinary number of bears. So that just makes an interesting experience living in.
Yeah. Keeps you on your toes in the morning.
Yeah. So it's those kind of, we had a rock festival out here in August 3 weeks ago, and there was a bear walking around near where we had people camping. So,
just trying to rock out. He's trying to,
And, sometimes we get moose in our parking lots, and we had a beaver, which is a very odd thing a number of years ago. So this kind of mix of, great world-class entertainment experiences in the venue, plus this interesting urban wildlife wilderness mix around our community, makes it a pretty interesting place to live.
One thing that I wanted to definitely get into with you that's unique to your area is chuck wagon racing, which you've written not one, not two, but 3 books and co-authored another one. So I'm guessing a lot of our listeners right now are saying, what exactly is chuck wagon racing?
There would be a lot of your listeners, especially in Eastern Canada and the United States. Professional chuck wagon racing is unique to Canada. Interestingly, there are a few, they dabble with it down a little bit in the States, but Canadians are the only people in the world who race chuck wagons professionally. And that happens primarily in Alberta and Saskatchewan. So there are some races north in Dawson Creek, which happened in August. And they're used to right next to our venue here in Prince George, just, 50 feet away. There used to be a chuck wagon racetrack, but that was for what they call pony wagons, which are slightly smaller horses that they use. and that racetrack was pulled up about 15 years ago. So I grew up in Calgary, and of course, the Calgary Stampede is the home of the first professional chuck wagon races, which happened in 1923. So this year was the 100th anniversary of chuck wagon races. And what is it? Back to that question.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have 4 thoroughbred horses pulling a chuck wagon, and the chuck wagon is what was the mobile kitchen on the plains. So you can look these up, and of course, when the first trail drives started out from Texas, when they're moving all these cattle after the Civil War. How much do you want a real history lesson on this?
I do.
Oh, yeah. Let's go in the weeds. Yeah.
Okay. So, Civil War, all these men head off to war. They come back to Texas, and after the Civil War, there's about 500,000 Texas Longhorns just roaming wild across Texas. And they saw that if they could get these cattle up to the trailheads, the railheads, they could take these cattle and ship them to mostly the meat packing plants in Chicago, and then distribute the meat there. So there's all this basically money wandering around in Texas, but they had to get these cattle up to the markets. So that was the birth of these great trail drives that you're familiar with in movies and folklore, of these cowboys trailing these hundreds to 1,000 head of cattle up from Texas, Oklahoma to Kansas. And then eventually they started moving the cattle up to Montana and into Canada, Alberta, Saskatchewan. But to move those cattle, they had to have these groups of men, and you had to feed the men. And so they had these wagons, and they became known as chuck wagons. And the reason they were called chuck wagons is because chuck was the cowboy colloquial term for food. So not because they were throwing stuff into the wagons, but the chuck was the food.
There you go. I never knew that.
Well, and I've heard chuck referred to as like almost like ground beef too before, right? Is that the same root?
Yeah, well, that's another term that it's used for, But the food was, but the chuck would be beans. They ate a lot of beans. And biscuits and molasses, and that'd be the food.
You're gonna
on
make
the way.
Dave start drooling here.
No, right? I'm in. So you have 3 books, right? Never Holler Whoa, Checkered Courage, the Rangeland Derby, 100 Years of Chuck Wagon Racing, plus you co-authored the Icon Brand Myth, Calgary Stampede. So people that come out to what are you covering with this, and how are you go about? Obviously, there's so many of us that have been told, oh, you should write a book. Right. Yeah. And not all of us have that talent and ability to do it. So number one, how did you actually get the time and the energy and pull it all together? And number 2, what is it about this that really spoke to you?
Okay. The first thing, so I started writing magazine articles. My first magazine article was published when I was in university. And that kind of sowed a seed for me to follow that interest. I like the aspect of the research, meeting people, finding stories, and then creating, the article. AI might make that, make it a little quicker for some people, but I certainly enjoy the journey and process of doing that. So I started doing those articles, which led to writing some magazine articles for the Calgary Stampede programs, which led into these first books on chuck wagon racing. And then this most recent book, I knew was going to be the 100th anniversary of chuck wagon racing in 2023. So I made some inquiries and fortunately connected with a publisher who was keen on the project too. But why chuck wagon racing? It just enchants me like nothing else. Like if you've ever seen a chuck wagon race, in my opinion, there is nothing like it. It is unique to the sports and entertainment industry, and unique to the culture of sports. And there, if you stand next to the rail as these 4 wagons and the outriders are chasing the wagons pass you, it kind of shakes you right through your chest, and it's just unbelievably thrilling. And I saw that as a kid, and for whatever reason, growing up in Calgary, was able to go to the Calgary Stampede, and I've been, fascinated by the the people who do it for the rest, my adult life, and have just had the opportunity to meet some of these families, the men and women who do it. And they have fabulous stories, just, unlike any other story that you'll be able to hear. And I've just been so privileged to help, share their stories and hopefully get other people to become Chuck Wagon ambassadors as well. So it's been a real privilege.
And it sounds like it's really stroking this nostalgia for you too, growing up doing it. I'm sure when you go see races now, you're almost like calling back to when you first saw it when you were a kid, and that first kind of feeling of like, I mean, you hit on a great point. And obviously we have the thoroughbred industry down here in Kentucky. They're not pulling wagons, but I mean, those are big horses. And when they're running down on the track, you can feel this like thunder. Like it is so many beating hooves of these big, giant, like athletic animals that it really, as a kid, it like makes an impression on you, because it's this like, very like boom, 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 like deep rumble. And so I'm sure it was this like left a mark on you and really kind of in a great, inspiring way that you kind of, keep revisiting that with new books where you're remembering probably, your impressions of it as a kid, and it's kind of, stayed with you.
Well, you know exactly what it's about if you've seen those races in Kentucky. I mean, just these ones add on the wagon. But the interesting thing is the Chuck Wagon cowboys from Canada will go down to Kentucky, or they go down to West Virginia, or they go to Nebraska, and they purchase the racehorses who are retired, who have no other options to carry on because their flat racing career is over. And they will take these horses that have no other option for, what they're going to do next, and they bring them back and they put them in the Chuck Wagon business, and they can race for another 15 years.
Yeah, that's wild too, because it is a team of horses, which is very different than like an individual horse racing. You really probably as a writer are having to pick these horses that complement each other, work well together. Like I'm imagining just hearing about, other things where you have a team of things like, like sled dogs, where you often hear about this camaraderie between the animals that really make the full experience, like I'm sure the best Chuck Wagon drivers, you really, analyze all of that with their horses too, which is probably really fascinating.
So these horses, you're exactly right. They have to put these horses in different positions to see, because they're working in a team, they're not used to that type of work, pulling a wagon, that they have to, kind of figure it out. So, they will try the horses in different positions and eventually find the spots that, suit their personality the best.
Glenn, you mentioned, your time back in university, and that's kind of where you first made your, foray into the live entertainment side of things. You got involved with the 1988 Calgary Winter Olympics, right?
That's correct.
How'd that happen? How'd that come about?
Well, I was kind of thinking about this, getting into this conversation. I think that, in a group of people, when you're a social group, as you're growing up and you're hanging out with your friends, that there's always somebody within those groups that kind of coordinates some of the social gatherings or the events that people get together to do. And, I can probably say that was probably myself within our group to some extent. But I think for all of us who are in the event business, we probably have some of those traits, right? Like within our groups of friends, we probably are the ones who are kind of, saying, okay, well, maybe we should go do this, or how about we go do that? And then they're just making the options for people to come together. And then that evolves into, for some people, it evolves into work in the event business. So the Calgary got the right to get the Olympics when I was a teenager. And I thought from that point, I wanted to be a volunteer. So I don't know why, but I thought, well, this is going to be a really neat experience. It's going to be a fabulous opportunity to participate in a world event. And so, I made some initial volunteering with the Western Canada Summer Games that came along. And then, just through the journey of being a volunteer with the Calgary Winter Olympics, there were some pre-Olympic events that you got to participate in. And then, when I was going to university, my fourth year, the final year, that's when the Olympics were in town. So all of us going to Calgary at that time, the Olympics were kind of this overbearing event that was coming onto the campus. So in fact, they used the dormitories right. And, we knew it was coming. So it was all, part of construction, part of, what the city was looking forward to. And then I just, had the opportunity to be a volunteer I worked out at the Canada Olympic Park. So that's where the ski jumping was, the bobsled. So, Eddie the Eagle was there when that was happening, and the Jamaican bobsled team. I was there when those situations were happening. I was by the track when that was taking place and they were coming down. And then also got to work at the opening and closing ceremonies. So participated with that. And, as I was reflecting on it, those experiences probably set course in life that here I am today, built. For me, that really touched something that I saw how magical those moments could be for people, bringing folks from all over the world, showcasing. In fact, chuck wagons were in the opening ceremonies in Calgary running around the field.
I love that.
I think that's, probably set an interest that has carried on for, the rest of my life. So very fortunate to be part of that.
From there, you went to work in kind of the museum industry, including working with a 35-year-old mummy.
That's correct. So, calling it the event business, but got into the cultural resource management aspect of it. So working in a museum down in Kelowna. And yes, you're right. So we had one of the various exhibits there. We had this Egyptian mummy who his name was Nefer. He was an Egyptian priest. And so we had all this public programming around him. But the kind of the funny story is that my colleagues went down because he was down in, I think, in Washington State. So they had to pick him up. And when they were bringing him back across the border, the customs officials asked for a death certificate. And the dude's 3,500 years old. So, he was dead. No question about it. And they didn't
bring out the pamphlet, the Egyptian pamphlet. We've got his organs in these little cases if you want to check.
That's right. Anyways, so they eventually got him across. And so that was a pretty interesting experience, doing some the events around, this and, we handled them, but he was very, right next to him as this mummified person. So that was a really interesting experience. So, yeah. And then that kind of carried into an opportunity working up here in Prince George for the historic sites and then doing events out there. And then, got into the sports entertainment events.
Yeah. How did you make that actual jump from, do you remember how it was? Was it an ad in the newspaper? How did you get the job at CN Center?
Yeah, it's as fancy as that. It was an ad in the newspaper. And so applied for it and, I was fortunate to be offered the opportunity, but done, different events working within the community. So I had some experience building events here in the north. The building at that time was just over 5 years old, and the business at that time had been, there'd been some challenges. And so, I was fortunate to come into it. I had to learn a lot, but there was a real opportunity for the business to grow here in Prince George and to attract the type of entertainment that we eventually have. So I was fortunate, I think, in a couple aspects, both in terms of personally in my career and also for the venue itself, that there was just a real chance to make it grow and blossom.
So, obviously there's a whole side of Glen that we haven't even touched on, which is, what you do away from work. And a big part of that is, I know your wife, Joanne, and your two daughters.
Yes, they are. So my wife, Joanne, she is a professional potter. So we have
That's awesome.
Studio in our basement, and she creates all kinds of interesting things. She's very talented. So that's kind of neat to see that happen in our family. And then our two daughters are in university, and one is finishing her last year here in Prince George. And she actually, speaking of, she had a very Canadian experience. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Anne of Green Gables stories, but they are very iconic Canadian story. And, around the world, and the Anne of Anne Shirley of Prince Edward Island is known. And my daughter was just spent this past summer working out at Prince Edward Island at the Anne of Green Gables Historic Site, which was with Parks Canada.
Wow.
She has red
wow.
hair, and she was portraying Anne with the braids for this past summer.
She was
so,
Anne of Green
she was
Gables.
Anne. So,
That's great.
as a
That's
Canadian,
great.
that makes me super proud. And then
Yeah.
our other daughter's just starting a year of school over in Dundee, Scotland. So she's going to experience going to school
wow,
in Scotland
cool.
this year. So lots of interesting experiences with our family these days.
Have either of them caught the event bug, or are they kind of like, oh, that's dad's thing, and sort of don't think about it as much?
Yeah, I think if anyone could be the older one, who's just, as I mentioned, down in Prince Edward Island. I think she's kind of had some pretty interesting experiences this past 2 summers as she's done this job. So I think they're, who knows, but I could see that she likes organizing, likes planning. So certainly could help.
There you go.
Well, I know we've only scratched the surface of some of your legendary tales, but we do need to wrap things up here before we run out of time. Before you go, I want to hit you with 5 quick questions. Just looking for your instant brief response. First up, do you remember your very first concert?
Yes, it was Mental as Anything with Men at Work.
Yes, very nice.
at the Jubilee Auditorium in Calgary.
How about, you have a favorite concert from over the years?
Yeah. So, like working or seeing?
Either way.
Yeah. My favorite concerts have been Midnight Oil.
Beds are
Australian
burning.
band.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
and then I managed to see 2 of their final shows last year, and one in Vancouver at the Melkin Bowl and Outdoor Amphitheater. They're the best band in the world. Sadly, they've packed it in for now, but yeah, amazing.
You never know. There's always those reunion tours.
Yeah.
What's your favorite thing to do on a day off?
Well, do it pretty regularly, but walking our dog's pretty funny. We have a funny dog, so as Paul's talking about keep looking after his dog. Dogs are,
Yeah.
I'd like to walk the dog. In fact, but the other thing is, winter time, we live very close to a Nordic ski club. So within 10
cool.
minutes, I can be skiing on 60 kilometers of trails and just having this amazing outdoor experience where you feel like you're in the middle of the wilderness, but it's 10 minutes from our house.
That's awesome. Well, you are an author, so I feel it's only appropriate. Give us a good book recommendation for a book that you didn't write. You have a favorite book?
Well, one of my favorite books. Have you read Ron Burgundy's biography?
I have not, but I would be interested.
Like, you got to look that up. So they made this false biography about Ron Burgundy. I forget the specific title. Oh, something at the top. Anyways, you guys can look it up.
Oh,
It
that's
is the
great.
funniest book. I read that book and I laugh every time. It's so ridiculous.
Last question for you. What is your theme song? So there's a reality TV show where cameras follow you around all the time. What is the song that plays over the opening credits to the Glen Mikkelsen show?
Okay. One song that I like listening to, maybe not theme song, but one of my favorite songs is Truganini by Midnight Oil.
There you go. Glen, if somebody wants to, check out your books or learn more about the CN Center, give us some plugs. Where can people follow you or buy the books or follow the CN Center?
Well, you can follow me on Instagram, which is, so exciting, my Instagram post, but it's at Never Holler Whoa. We've got a CN Center website, cncenter.ca. And we have, if you want to look up into the books, the first 2 are a little trickier to find, but the other one, I'm not, right now it's on Canadian book distributors. If you look on at amazon.ca, but actually one of the best places to look for is on the World Professional Chuckwagon Association's website. So I think it's WPCA.com. If you go on their website and you'll see shop, and you can go down and you can purchase the book there. And then plus you can find out all things about chuckwagon racing too.
Very cool. Glen, thank you so much for taking the time to share your adventures with us. Really apprient it.
Well, thank you for
been
thinking
great.
that my adventures are of interest.
Of course.
That may have been the most Canadian episode yet. I would expect nothing less, Glen. Hey, a big thanks to everybody for listening to this episode of Adventures in Venueland. Remember, you can subscribe and find more episodes wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. We do love your 5-star reviews so you can help others find us. Until the next adventure, I'm Dave Redelberger.
And I'm Paul Hooper. Thanks for listening, everyone. Everyone, keep an eye out for those bears in your backyard. Adventures in Venueland is a side project of the Event and Venue Marketing Conference, a marketing conference that brings together diversified event and venue professionals to cultivate education, collaboration, and innovation for the growing sports and live entertainment industry. Find out more at eventvenuemarketing.com.
Audio editing and mixing by Camille Faulkner.
Design and digital advertising by Megan Ebeck.
Copywriting and publicity by Samantha Marker.
Guest booking and brand strategies by Paul Hooper.
Guest research by Dave Rettelberger.
Marketing strategies by Paul Hooper, Megan Ebeck, and Samantha Marker. Thanks for joining us. Until the next adventure.